Breaking news coming out of Washington, D.C. President Joe Biden is no longer the Democratic nominee for the 2024 election.
The polling just in the last few hours has been devastating for President Biden, not so much in the horse race, the head-to-head, because it's going to be a close election in a closely divided country. But the battleground state polling has been particularly bad. There's been new polling out of the state of Michigan in particular that's made the rounds. And beyond that, our new ABC Ipsos poll out just today had Donald Trump's approval rating up 9 points from a month ago and its highest rating in 4 years. It appears that he got a significant bounce out of his convention and after the assassination attempt last weekend. And that's part of the hill that Biden would have had to climb while he's losing the support of party leaders, while the polls are flipped against him. He would have had to turn all of that around and more. That appears to have played a major piece of the equation into making that final decision for him as he recovered from COVID and as he coped with the massive defections inside his own party.
Folks, this has never happened in American history. In nearly 2.5 centuries of time, no major nominee has ever withdrawn from the race just a handful of months before the actual election. And so this is on the surface of it, unprecedented and shocking development, but it can't be a surprising development, especially the Democratic Party. They should have seen this coming from a mile away. And I think that really they've been their own worst enemies, as we're going to see here, because they have helped create the very bed that they're now having to lie in. And they're in a crisis mode, as we're going to see shortly, because this issue has a lot more ramifications than just who's going to win the presidential election, as we're going to see. This has ramifications for the U.S. domestically and for international issues, war and peace in various places around the world. And we're going to talk about that. This is quite consequential. And really what I want to lay out here right now, this is all, I mean, it literally just broke. I mean, this news is so fresh. And as we always do here at Daniel Davis Deep Dive, we're going to stay on top of this. And we're going to continue to break things down as more information comes out, more knowledge. Like we always do, we want to bring you the news when it's first happening. But what I want to do right now, before we even get, some of that additional information, is I want to kind of show you a deep dive on how we got to this point and how it was entirely predictable and how they should have taken action a lot earlier could have avoided, for the Democratic Party anyway, this crisis that they have now thrown themselves into. And this all started, I mean, you can go back even to 2019, before the 2020 election, before Joe Biden was even the Democratic nominee for the last election. You had David Axelrod, who was one of the senior presidential advisors for Barack Obama, very influential in the Democratic Party, in a Politico piece let's see, I think that was in June of 2019. He told, he was interviewed, I'm sorry, for this Politico piece, and he says that Joe Biden's back and forth on the Hyde Amendment was a bad look in light of a background narrative surrounding his age. And in case you're not familiar with what that was, the Hyde Amendment, that was something where he completely changed his views on one thing. He said one thing and then he completely flipped to another. Not that he was just a flip-flopper, but it was implying that he was not aware of some things that he himself had been a position on earlier. But Axelrod continues, when you are 76 and age is in question, you don't want to be in a situation where your campaign says you, quote, misheard the question. Axelrod said, this is one reason I think they kept him on a relatively leisurely pace on the campaign trail and away from some of the major events and away from reporters, frankly, because they're worried about things just such as the one we have just seen, Axelrod said. So you can see even back then, in 2019, the people handling Biden's campaign were concerned about what might happen if he has too much access to the media. Now, that was going to be helped quite a bit by the onset of the pandemic, when he, quote, campaigned from his basement. And, the claim was, well, we have to do it here because of health reasons. But it turned out that was quite fortuitous for them for his campaign. That article continued on. Gary, if you can throw that out there, it says one of the other Democratic figures says people go to hear Uncle Joe and wind up seeing Grandpa Joe, said progressive Democratic consultant Rebecca Katz, noting that fellow Democrats who have seen Biden speaking at campaign events and come away believing that he's not the same vigorous politician many remember. The Joe Biden of 2019 is not the same Joe Biden of 2008. And anyone who has seen him on the stump or even read the transcripts of one of his recent speeches can see that. Look, folks, we're talking at 2019. So while there was still, whatever it was, like a dozen or more people running for the campaign to be the Democratic nominee for the 2020 election, he was already having significant problems in that. And by, I guess it was March of 2020, so relatively early in the campaign season, while actually at that time, Pete Buttigieg was one of the leading runners at the time. And this didn't help Joe Biden when he made this rather famous gaffe.
It's time for America to get back up on its feet and once again fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident. Sounds corny, not a joke. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing. You know how we talk about it. Are we the people?
Yeah, I remember that at the time, and I remember thinking, wow, he really is getting old. And it's not just getting old. I mean, because you see, he was quite vigorous and emphatic in that speech with the things that he was saying. But you could see that there was some kind of like mechanic or wiring in his brains, that got disconnected somehow. And in the middle of a speech, he suddenly just got tongue-tied. And you could see he was in his eyes were like searching, where is the connection? Where are the words that are supposed to be there? Stuff that's so easy that he should know. Of course, he'd rehearsed that probably 100 times before that. And all of a sudden the words weren't there. And he had that big stumble. But it turned out to be, it wasn't that frequent. Everybody you certainly noticed it at the time. But then his subsequent speeches were fine. And he continued on to have a vigorous debate. He went on to all of the many debates that they had to get the nominee selected in 2020, and he had no more problems. Didn't have any onstage issues at all. So people just said, okay, well, that was weird, but I guess it's fine. And of course, then we know he goes on to win. Now, in his acceptance speech when he became president, he again looked very presidential. He had considered himself a bridge to the future. I'll talk about that in a minute. But on that day, he looked both presidential, powerful, confident, self-assured, and said this to America.
I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide, but unify. Who doesn't see red states and blue states, only sees the United States.
Now, as you know, I've said many times on this channel, I want every American president to be successful. I'm not like, oh, I didn't vote for this guy, so I don't like him, and I want him to fail. No, I don't want anyone to fail, because if any president fails, that means by definition Americans lose, and Americans pay the price for that. And I don't want America to pay a price for anything. I want them to succeed. And I remember my wife and I both watching that live when it happened, and we both said, wow, maybe he's going to be different. Maybe he's not going to be like every other politician. And he actually means that he wanted to, heal the nation's soul, as he phrased it. And he's going to be a president for everybody. And he's going to try to just do things that make sense for people. Perfect. He had kind of allayed some of the concerns about his age, because like I said, from that moment forward, pretty much through the rest of the campaign season, he seemed relatively okay. And like I said, performed well during the debate. So the things that really mattered, he conducted himself in a normal way. Didn't have any problems with it. But then as he got into office, things start changing a little bit. So in 2021, and I'm not going to put these things on there. You can find them. There are tons of places where you can Google Joe Biden gaffes of 2021, Joe Biden gaffes of 2022, 23, et cetera. You can go find those things, and you can see that all of a sudden now then there's starting to be more issues. There's starting to be more problems. And then in 2022, you had a rather dramatic change. This one is not a gaffe so much as a radical transformation from that previous video I just showed you when he won in November of 2020 to this.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. They promote authoritarian leaders, and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country.
Wow. So you went from saying there's no red states and blue states, there's just the United States, to now then you literally paint the stage in this dark, ominous kinds of of imagery, and then you turn the red states into the enemy by name, directly saying they're a danger, and led by Donald Trump. But you see, it was the whole, what they call the MAGA crowd, which from the electoral results, you're talking tens of millions of Americans, and he just demonized them all. And so even more than maybe a gaffe, you have to go, whoa, what happened to the guy that wanted to be the president for everybody? He turned kind of dark on that. And as you know, that continued on. If you've seen a show we did in I guess late July, where we talked about a lot of the transition heading into the assassination attempt on Trump on the 13th of July, you saw that there was lots of these comments that Biden went from that point forward, and just that was a common theme. And there was lots of that, that darkness that went on there to demonize half of the United States. And so one has to wonder, was that a cognitive issue? Why would he suddenly change, in mid-course there? But then here's the other thing here. Now, like I said, Google the gaffes of 2021 and 2022, 2023. You'll see there was a bunch of them. That's the moment in 2022, especially, where the Democratic Party had their golden opportunity to get this taken care of in a coherent, orderly, and reasonable fashion. Biden himself had said that he considered himself to be a transition figure, a bridge to the next generation, I think. Gary, if you can throw that headline up there. Yeah, that's the one. So that's what it said. And again, this is March 9th of 2020. So this is still early, even in the primary season. And he was saying it all along. I'm a bridge to a new generation. So I'm not somebody that's going to be around forever. I just want to be a bridge. And many people interpreted that well, especially given his age, he's probably just going to be a one-term president. Now, I as I said to many, really in the first 2 years, I thought, actually from the very beginning, from just the first few months of his administration, once he took over, I thought he is definitely positioning himself as a one-term president. I think he is initially tried to put Kamala Harris up on the top, give her a lot of high-profile missions, right away. And I think his intention was to start getting her, in a presidential way, letting people see that she could take the reins of power, and that he was going to let her do this. And I think one of the evidences of that was when in 2021, or early in his administration, when he decided he was going to go ahead and withdraw from Afghanistan. Now, all the other presidents had refused to actually carry through on that, even though both at one point or another, both Obama and Trump had said they were going to withdraw, and then they ended up changing their mind because they realized the political heat that was going to cause. But if you think that you're only a one-term president and you're not even worried about getting reelected, then you're going to take the chance if you think that's the right thing to do, because you're not worried about the electoral cost of it. And I think that when he took that on, and he was willing to take, and he did take a lot of political heat, and I gave him a lot of credit for it at the time, and still do, for the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. We'd been there 20 years. It was a complete and utter disaster. There was zero prospect ever to win the war. All we could do is continue the loss of life, et cetera. Trump had negotiated an end to it that all Biden had to do was just let the agreements roll out, and everything would have been fine. But that's where he made some mistakes. I don't want to delve into it. The way he conducted the withdrawal was just hideous, and had a lot of flaws with it. But his decision to leave indicated that he was not worried about the political fallout that he would have taken over that. But that's not what they did. So when the 2020 midterms came, because I thought that's when it's going to find out. As soon as the midterm elections are, because he can't announce that he's a one-term president before that, because that could have down ballot issues, ramifications on the Democratic Party. They still have to give the impression that they're going forward with their agenda, et cetera. Then after the election, crickets. Nothing at all. Nobody said anything. Biden just continued on. And so I thought, well, I guess I was wrong. I thought that that's what he had intended. Now, one thing I'll tell you could have been at play here, and we'll probably only find these things out many, many years into the future when all the tell-all books come out where people are saying what was going on behind the scenes. But one of the potentials that I think happened is that when Biden, in those first half year or so, was putting Kamala Harris in these prior real high profile events, international, national, she bombed. You can go back and look at some of the headlines from especially the first half of his 2021 when he was in office. Man, she had a lot of real gaffes, and they started with this cackle laugh thing that she has at the most inappropriate times. She made these comments and statements that very often were just word salad that didn't seem to make any sense about anything, and it was not received well internationally. And it could be that Biden said, okay, hang on, not ready to hand the reins off to this one just yet. I guess I better keep going here. Power has a tendency to do that. So that's the golden opportunity that the Democratic Party had. Now, they knew behind the scenes that the deterioration was going on, not just a big video of a bunch of gaffes with funny music. They knew the reality of it behind the scenes. Whether Biden wanted to or not, the Democratic Party had the chance to do then what they did, and it was, we'll get to here in a minute, heading into Biden's decision to withdraw, because they put a lot of pressure. The Democratic Party leaders, especially, all kind of banded together in the last bit of this season here. They didn't do that before in 2022. If they had, imagine then they would have had this orderly transition. They would have had, a chance to actually have a competitive primary season. They could have, hand selected somebody. They could have done what parties do all the time. They could have had their 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 favorites, and set them up or whatever, and then let the process roll out. So then they get a nomination, and they get years to set the stage, to try to build them up, to try to have all the PR thing to make them look good, et cetera. They're going up against Trump. All that stuff could have been done in an orderly manner. That got us up then through 2023. They didn't have the transition when they had a chance. They decided to roll the dice and just keep going. Early 2024, that came back to bite them. In the early part of that year, I think it was in February 6th to be specific, President Biden was on a press conference where he was asked about the potential for negotiated settlement between Hamas and Israel in that ongoing war there. And he was trying to talk about some of the things that Hamas had done and whether or not they were going to go to negotiated settlement. He had a really bad moment about which at the time I made a short video and a tweet. So watch what I actually put together.
There is some movement, and I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words. There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
The worst thing that could happen is that nobody does anything. We continue to pretend everything's fine. Folks, it's not fine. I mean, you can see with your own eyes. You don't need my interpretation. You can see it. There is something that's not right. And the longer it goes, I mean, you've probably all seen people with dementia and have their capacities deteriorate over time. It doesn't reverse. It doesn't get better. And this is the most challenging position on the planet. There is no more stressful position than the president of the United States. Again, it doesn't matter whether you ever like or dislike somebody or what their policies are, but the man that has occupied that position, there is no greater stress and pressure on him than it can be imagined. And especially when you add on top of that the rigors of a presidential campaign, while you have to do with stuff like the Israeli-Hamas war or the Russia-Ukraine war, issues with China, all of those things on your head all at the same time, it's just an enormous strain on somebody. And somebody who's clearly having some cognitive issues, it's just going to make it worse. And I don't think that President Biden deserves that. And I hope that his team is going to recognize this and do what's best for him and what's best for the nation, because the status quo is just not sustainable for anyone. And man, did it ever play out like that? The status quo was not sustainable. It did get worse, and now then we have the wreckage of that. And it's important to note here, because I want you to pay attention to one thing from that clip that I just showed, because you saw it in the 2020 clip, in the March 2020 clip, where he's sitting there talking, and all of a sudden it's like a wire gets disconnected in his brain, and he's searching, trying to find it with his eyes. You can see him looking around, like, where's the word? That's not there. It was relatively short in 2020. Then the one you saw there, you can see him again. And by the way, I've talked to some dementia experts who have pointed this out and said this is how it works, is that the eyes start moving around because inside the brain, they're actually searching for the connection that's supposed to be there. And in the one I just showed you, you see again him looking away, only this time it's not real short, and he didn't find it. I mean, in the March 2021, he just started throwing other words in there until he figured something out and then moved on. In this one, there weren't any words there. He couldn't find anything. And that was eerily prescient and premonition to what happened at that infamous debate with Trump. Watch this.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Yeah, I mean, again, you see the eyes, he's searching, there's no connection there. And you know, folks, again, this is not any kind of a bash Joe Biden situation. This is a human cognition issue. And sooner or later, many people, most people maybe, when they get older, are going to discover that, or they're going to find out that that's affecting them. And it's just a horrible thing to experience and to endure, especially if it's you. So there's no condemnation here. That's just part of how it works. But then you have to get to the point. And now then I think that was the red alert for the Democratic Party. Because prior to that issue right there, you had the Democratic Party who, again, as I've said, they've known all along behind the scenes. They knew the truth. And instead of taking action in 2022 or any other time when they had the easy opportunity, they kept saying stuff like this.
What I know who I'm going to choose. It's going to be one of the most successful presidents in modern American history.
His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years.
President Biden, who I've been around numerous times just in this last year, is sharp. He's focused. He's bright.
This is a man who is sharp, who is on top of his game, who knows what's going on.
He's smart. He's on his game.
I mean, you see, they're all saying the same things because they literally did have a playbook. They literally did have talking points. They're all singing from the same song because they want to cover for him. But look, that you just can't keep down that road, because it's one thing if you lose it in a press conference. It's one thing if you lose it in a debate. But what happens if there's a war and peace issue, a crisis, the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, something where the president of the United States is the sole elected person that gets to make decisions on whether there's war or peace, or how he's going to respond to a potential enemy action here. You can't have the guy with the nuclear launch codes suddenly start going, and lose it there. You just can't do that. The Democratic Party owes it to America. They owe it to themselves, but they owe it to all of us to make sure that doesn't happen. And if President Biden himself can't come to that conclusion, then they should have acted. Now, that is apparently what's happening now. Now that it's no longer something they can hide, and now then even the Democratic Party itself is starting to fray. So there was a poll not long ago that came out very recently, actually after that debate gaffe, where it said that 2/3 of the Democratic Party want him to withdraw. The Democratic Party, not the general election. You already know that how most of the Republicans would come out on that, but the Democrats themselves, the regular voters, the party members, said that they wanted that. And then you started seeing more and more speed pick up, more and more initiative that the Democratic leaders now start coming to. So the very same people, many of which you saw in that clip a second ago, were always saying about how great he is, how he's sharp, he's on top of stuff. Now then they're saying not so much. And then finally it got to the point to where they're saying he's got to go. You had Chuck Schumer, you had Representative Schiff, and one of the key ones was Nancy Pelosi. But I think that the final death nail was when Obama came out. And here is how it was reported on Fox News.
President Obama is telling allies that Joe Biden needs to step aside. Marie, the exact language is seriously consider his viability. You said 2 minutes ago, we're waiting to hear from Obama. Well, we're hearing from him through the pages of the Washington Post.
Yeah, I just got chills when you read that. You know, I worked for President Obama, as you know, and he has very good political instincts. He has throughout this process. He's also very cautious, though, Kayleigh. So throughout the days since the debate, he has stood by Joe Biden, but I think started to hear increasingly from people that believe there is no path for President Biden to win.
And I think that probably Obama was like the last one. Nancy Pelosi, who was maybe just one step below Obama in the reverence among the Democratic Party, had not quite gone that explicit, but expressly refused to endorse Biden and would not say that, yes, I think he should stay. She was coy about it. And I think that kind of gave space to others in the Democratic Party to start doing the same thing. But on that July 18th day, when Obama allowed these things to get out, and you got to know that that was not a leak or a, an inadvertent spill, but that's something that they had planned through the Washington Post. I think that was the death knell. And I think at that point, Biden realized it probably didn't matter what he thought anymore, because there was also concurrent with that, and maybe even what led Obama to make those statements, was that some of the biggest Democratic bundlers had decided to withhold their money. They said, we're not giving you any more money at all until you step down. And so I think that once that happened, and apparently they made good on that threat and were not giving money, then I think that the Democratic Party finally panicked and said, yeah, we're going to do that. And so that then led to the announcement we just had. And like I said, we're going to continue to follow this. And as soon as we get more details, we'll bring them to you. But now then that brings us into what next? What's going to happen next? What's the next crisis that the Democratic Party is going to have to solve? A crisis of their own making here. And the first part is just, who's that going to be putting on there? Now, the obvious first choice is going to be current Vice President Kamala Harris. They would just elevate her to the top of the ticket and put her on there. But one of the reasons why that seems like it would be one of the obvious ones is because in the way the campaign fundraising finance law goes, if people have donated to the Biden-Harris campaign and all of a sudden the Biden part drops out, but Harris is still there, that money can all be used. But if it's somebody else like Gretchen Whitmer, if it's the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, then that money can't be used. And so they would literally have to start from scratch. And for good or ill, people know who Kamala Harris is, and not enough of the voting population is very familiar with those other ones. And they just, almost would be fighting a losing battle there that would have very little prospect. There may not be a lot of prospect anyway, but it seems like that it would be Kamala Harris. Or would it? Because apparently on the 19th of July, there was AOC, Representative AOC, actually put this out on her, I think it was on her TikTok account, that she's not so sure about this. Even though there's lots of these backdoor negotiations going on within the Democratic Party, she's not sure she's on board. Watch this.
If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Kamala, Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken. And I'm going to say that because if they're going to come out and say all their little things on background off the record, but they're not going to be fully honest, I'm going to be honest for them. I'm in these rooms. I see what they say in conversations. A lot of them are not just interested in removing the president. They are interested in removing the whole ticket.
Wow, that was pretty stark and pretty telling. So apparently it's not such an obvious choice that it's going to be Kamala Harris. And perhaps one of the reasons for those on the other side within the Democratic Party on getting rid of the whole ticket is because they saw this from early in 2024 when a book came out about Kamala Harris, and it quoted several of her close aides or people who had been very close to her. And they said, this person should not be president. She is not qualified to be president. Again, these are Democrats that are saying this. This is not the Republicans. So apparently, even on the inside, there is great doubt about who should become the nominee if Biden pulls out. So we'll see how all that works out. because obviously the Democrats, as of this hour, don't even know for sure who they want, and there is great disputes inside, according to AOC, about what even they want to do. And we'll see how that works out. And with their own time coming up very soon, where they're going to have their the big Democratic Party to announce what should have been the celebration, to announce at the convention that Joe Biden and all that stuff. Now that who are they going to put? And there's not a lot of time in between now and then to figure this stuff out. So that kind of leads us to what may happen next. And that is the international ramifications for all of this, because it's not just the Democratic Party. It's not just the American election that's going on, but this has significant international ramifications. And when you add in what happened to President Trump with the attempted assassination on July 13th, with his convention and how all that went, and to great fanfare, and especially his speech that he gave on that Thursday night was watched by millions and millions of people, because it was the first time he had spoken in public since the assassination attempt, and certainly gave the image of someone who is in charge of course, you've probably all seen that iconic photo with his hand raised up in the air with the flag in the background, with blood on his face. I mean, that's something that'll get people energized. And when you're comparing that to, even if Biden hadn't have dropped out, the image from that debate, those would have been juxtaposed. And it seems like it would have been very little chance for that Biden would have been elected under any circumstances. But I just don't see, just electoral politics being what they are, that there's any legitimate prospect for any Democrat to win, no matter who they put on there. Well, what impact is that going to have? So there's at least three different things I want to talk about here. And that's this, is that, first of all, because President Trump selected J.D. Vance as his running mate, Vance has been outspoken for quite a long time, as we've mentioned several times, Senator Vance, on this show over the last few months, about how he is against continuing to support the war in Ukraine, because he says it's unwinnable. He says it's a math problem. We don't have the capacity. Ukraine doesn't have the manpower capacity. So it's pointless and counterproductive to continue on with the war. That was his position then. Now then, the chances of him being vice president, and the reason why he was selected, one of the reasons, by Trump, because they are of the same view of that. Trump himself has, of course, said many times that if he wins, he'll have that war wrapped up quickly. But it's very, very clear that he has no intention, President Trump, if he wins, of continuing on the Biden process of just as long as it takes, and just keep throwing money out there for another 10 years. So how is that going to be received by, first of all, let's look at the Ukraine soldiers and the leader of Ukraine. So from this moment right now, when any rational thinking person who understands anything about politics understands that the race has effectively been handed to President Trump. So now then, that all these policies he said are going to be coming into effect most likely in January of 2025. And so what is that going to do in the meantime? Now, imagine you're a combat soldier and you've been fighting heroically against all odds for 2.5 years. 2.5 years. And you've been, especially this entire calendar year, your forces have been pushing further and further back. You've been suffering huge casualties just to hang on to even small villages in several places. Now, you've been hanging on because you keep getting these words from, this NATO summit in July, from statements by other European leaders, and certainly by the United States president and the vice president, that we're going to provide help indefinitely. And we're going to keep going. We signed this 10-year bilateral agreement. So you're thinking, okay, well, more help is coming. We just need to hang on a little bit longer. Now, all of a sudden, that there's an end date to that. You can look just a little bit ahead up the road here, and you can see that this support's going to stop. Now, are you going to keep fighting with the same vigor and tenacity up until January 20th of 2025, knowing that then all of a sudden the pipeline is going to run out of ammunition, weapons, and everything else? Why would you want to die? Why would you want to continue to fight fearlessly and ferociously every day, knowing that there's an end date coming up? And there is nothing on the Russian side that shows any indication of slowing down in between now and then. In fact, their production levels continue to go up. They continue to recruit tens of thousands of troops per month. So you can see Now then the writing is not just on the wall, but it's in big neon bright lights. There is no prospect to success here. And now then it's going to really, really kick in. So the question is going to be, will the Ukraine side keep fighting? That has ramifications also for Volodymyr Zelensky, because if he keeps asking his troops to continue fighting in spite of all of these facts that I just mentioned, in spite of the political reality that is now starting to dawn, are they going to obey the orders? Will he be at risk of possibly a coup, possibly people turning against him? He's got to calculate that, and it's not a hypothetical situation here. That's a very real possibility. I assure you that he's considering that right now, because whatever anybody wants to say about him, he's not stupid. So he is aware, and he is seeing what's going on, and he's understanding how it may affect him. So we don't even know for sure if he's going to try to preempt his own situation by now having maybe a negotiated settlement with Russia. There was already news even before this happened that he was considering having another peace summit where, okay, we'll invite Russia this time. Was really impressive to Russia, but at least it shows, all right, well, I'm willing to have a negotiated settlement. I'm willing to at least discuss it now. Well, you got to imagine that's got a lot more movement now and a lot more emphasis now, because he sees there is an end date coming to the support. The pipeline is about to run dry. So he's got some real big issues. Additionally, you've got the EU states, NATO members, other EU states and other actors. We already have talked many times in this channel about Viktor Orban and the fact that Slovakia, Bulgaria, Turkey were already behind his move to try to find a negotiated settlement. Because after meeting with Putin, you had Orban who said, you know what, folks, the next few months are going to be really bloody, more so than all the previous 7 months of the year. So implying he was told something, that something big is coming, because the bloodshed had already been horrific for this year for the Ukraine side. They've, by all accounts, suffered extraordinary levels of casualties. So if someone says something even bigger is coming, then that means that he must know something. So Orban was actually censured by many in the European Union prior to this event happening, where Biden has declared his dropping out of the race. And so I assure you, though, that they're now going to hedge, because when Orban was going in one direction and they thought maybe Biden will carry the day in another direction, they're willing to still stick with Biden because he's the president. And if he was going to continue to be president, they'd want to stay on his good side. Now then, deprived of that, now then they're going to hedge. I mean, they wouldn't be politicians if they did anything else. It's not sure exactly how they're going to hedge yet, what they're going to do, but I assure you that they are now wide open to looking over to Hungary and seeing that sample there. So they may also be willing to support a new movement to peace, and they'll cover it in whatever kind of flowery language they want. But I doubt very seriously you're going to see a lot of interest in any of these states to say, let's send a bunch of our jets, a bunch of our tanks, armored personnel carriers, billions of our currency, ammunition, whatever. If you think it's going into a literal black hole, if you think now, then there's not even the fiction that this is going to turn anything around the battlefield. I doubt very seriously you're going to see a lot of countries willing to weaken their own national security by diminishing their self-defense capacity even further. So that's going to have a big issue or a big impact on them as well, which obviously has negative ramifications for Ukraine, no matter what they internally figure out. And then the last one is Vladimir Putin, because this may also change his calculation. It appears by all accounts that he was already planning on some sort of a summer big offensive, something different and larger than what he had done up to this point. You can go and look. We actually had just a few days ago with Colonel Jacques Beau, a whole show devoted to this. I strongly encourage you to go watch that to see what we're talking about. So there was already evidence that Putin was thinking about something. But now then, he may actually accelerate and possibly even expand his plans if he likewise calculates that the morale and the motivation for the Ukraine side is weaker. He could see an opportunity to press his military advantage and actually try to create a collapse of the Ukrainian army. That's always been a possibility. I've been saying really this whole year that I thought that there was a 50-50 shot that the Ukraine army could collapse at some point, even before the end of the summer. And now then, that is becoming even more possible. The chances of that seem even more prospect for coming to pass now than it did before, because of these political developments on top of the physical military ones that are already engaging on the ground. Folks, wars are ultimately waged with the mentality and the will of one side or the other. And when the will of one side is broken, that's when the actions on the ground break. Just imagine, for example, look at the Vietnam War. We had the military superiority from day one all the way through. We had the technology, we had trained manpower, we had tools of war, we had an inexhaustible supply of ammunition and weapons. We would never have have an insufficient amount. And yet we lost because we could never break the will of the North Vietnamese side. They continued to fight. They suffered an incredible number of casualties. And then finally, our will to support, because we're like, well, this is pointless. It's half a world away. It has nothing to do with our national security at home. And so deprived of political will, then all that had the ramifications on the physical battlefield. Even though we never lost an actual tactical fight, we won every fight we had. But in the famous words of I think it was Ho Chi Minh, one of the North Korean leaders, North Vietnamese leaders, they said it didn't matter. It didn't matter that you won all the battles because we won the war. And in the likewise here, Ukraine has been fighting fanatically and heroically for 2.5 years. But if their will breaks, if they see that there's no more a path to even survival, then no matter what they've done up to this point, things could change rapidly. So we'll be watching to see all of those things, how they play out here. And you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you up on top of that. Last thing I want to point out here, this is a lot less certain, but something I'm going to be watching for because I have seen it play out in the past. And that is if President Biden withdraws from the campaign, but continues to be president of the United States, and think he's going to go until January of 2025, I'm not completely sure that he's going to make it that long in office. So far, all we've heard is that he's withdrawn from the campaign. We haven't heard that he's resigned his position or so. But I have seen many people, and some of my relatives have some direct experience with this from some of their family members, is that deprived of the focus and the drive and the purpose and the meaning to be president, something that Biden had been trying to do most of his adult life, I'm not sure that he's going to be able to continue to hang on. We could see a significant deterioration in his health, and that could mean the elevation of President Harris, whether anybody wants to or not, whether she wins an election or not. So that could also have a lot of ramifications to some things, and it is unfortunately not an outlandish possibility. Biden himself could not that he would die in office necessarily, but that he may withdraw and resign as well, maybe in the coming months, because if you don't have that focus and that drive, it's going to be a lot harder to do your daily stuff. And if, as we've been talking about a lot, the dementia itself continues to accelerate and his condition degenerate, he may not have any choice in the matter too. So this situation is far from over, both within the Democratic Party and within the White House itself. So that is also something we're going to be keeping a lot of eye on. But there are a lot of moving parts here and a lot of ramifications all around the world for this. Count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to continue to keep you on top of it. Folks, we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, no matter how complex it is. And you can count on us to keep doing that. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.